Hi, and welcome to week 5 of Research Methods. Hope you guys had a nice weekend. I heard it was quite cold in New York, so I am sending you sunshine and warmth from Arizona. Also, wanted to say that it was great to meet with many of you on the Google Hangout last Thursday. Thought that went very well once we got the technology under our belt, and hopefully, we'll be doing a few more of those throughout the semester. And also, I wanted to remind you that we have our first component of the research study project due at the end of this week. So I will put up an announcement with the due date and the time, and I'm expecting everybody to get their question and bibliography in. So let's continue and talk a little bit about aims and objectives as it relates to research methods. This is going to be a little bit less theoretical than the last few presentations, a little bit more concrete, and it's also going to speak to kind of exactly what you're doing in your research project. So let's first start with the topic. As you know, I sent you guys questions that would be kind of your topic. Again, whether that be something like video games and Parkinson's or electronic cigarettes and quitting smoking or whatever, you do have a topic. So what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to go back into the literature and take a look at what exists in relation to the topic that you were given. It's a very important place to start because it will actually illuminate for you or identify for you the gaps in the literature. Take a look also at other areas of study that are related to your question. So again, if it's electronic cigarettes and quitting smoking, take a look at the areas of study related to possible breast cancer, related to lung cancer, related to just overall incidence of cigarette smoking in the United States, things of that nature. Third, take a look at the societal issues, and this is kind of 3 and 4, the societal issues and also what is popular. So look out there and see what kind of information has been published on your particular topic as it relates to society, or you could even look in popular magazines. You don't have to necessarily cite those magazines, but it can lead you to other types of sources later on. And in this case, your preference is not really under your control because I kind of provided and furnished you with the question. So although that doesn't pertain to this particular project, it does pertain to research in general. So you really do want to do something that is of your preference, something that you have interest in. And also brainstorm sessions are a really good thing. So if you can get a group together and maybe brainstorm and come up with, ways to look into other sources or possibly, meet together and say, okay, I'm going to look for 2 sources for you, you look for 2 sources for me, and then kind of pull it together and see what you come up with. Group work can be very beneficial, and you can come up with ideas that you would not have come up with on your own. Or look at some of the people who have done work in the field who are world renowned or very well known. Mentors, tutors, or even people, scientists who have looked at this area, or even a group of scientists who have looked at this area. There are, for instance, I used to be involved in heart failure, and there was usually a group from Italy and a group from Columbia Presbyterian that were very well known in the heart failure literature, sphere. And people would look to them for a lot of the answers, or at least look at their papers to see where they could go next and what needed to be researched. So I think that's also a good place to start. So in terms of the topic, there are those things that I think you can kind of start working on your question, start, building it out. Now let's take a look at the spin. So it's all in the spin. I've said this before in some of the other presentations, and that is that, a lot of the research that we read today is it's not really unique. It's not always novel. So often it's research that is just a little bit different than what's been done before. And let's kind of go through some of these bullets to talk about how we can make our research different than what's out there. First of all, geography, and that is exactly what it sounds like. Location. Where was the research done? Was the research done, in a free living condition? Was it done in a laboratory? Was the research done in a tropical climate? Was it done in a cold climate? Was the research done in a desert situation? Was it done in a controlled environment, again, which would be like a laboratory? So there are a lot of different ways to kind of manipulate that. Take a look at the geography of where you would like to do your research study. Where would you like to collect your data? If you notice that most of the data in the literature was done in a laboratory, suggest a free living situation. That really does kind of change the way that the readers that they accept and kind of receive the research, and it also gives the research a different type of appeal. Take a look at the social constructs that are related to the research. So what are the social issues around the research at the moment? Again, taking for instance the cigarette smoking question, there's a lot of opposition to cigarette smoking, as you know, in this country. It's only gotten more fierce as the years have gone on. Campuses are now becoming, smoke-free. Obviously, cities are becoming smoke-free. We've seen bars and restaurants become smoke-free, airplanes, all of that. That was not the case in the 1970s and 80s. That's only in the last probably, roughly 25 to 30 years that we've seen that has changed. So what are the social constructs around that particular question? Now, you may not be able to answer the social constructs to all of the questions that I gave. Some of those questions may not have social underpinnings to them, but some of them may. So if they do, you really need to be well versed in how society views either that question or that topic, and then move from there. You can change the way you do your research if you know what society is kind of thinking about a particular topic. Oh, here's a new way to look at it. So that's a really nice way of spinning it in a different manner. Temporal issues, meaning time. So, if most of the research on your question has been done over the course of 12 weeks, you want to do a 1-year study. Again, you're not going to actually do the study, but you're proposing it in a sense. So it's part of your methodology that you change the temporal aspects of the study. That's another way to spin it a little bit differently. What's the context of the study? So in what type of frame or what kind of framework do you want to use for your particular research topic? Again, it really depends upon the question. But is there a context that you can kind of spin a little bit differently to give the study a different flavor? And what are the methodologies that you're going to use? That we'll talk a little bit more specifically about when we get to methods, but there's so many different ways of actually doing a research study that, again, your approach may not be novel as far as the actual topic, but it may be novel in terms of the way that you present it or the methods that you use. So now let's talk more specifically about how we narrow down and target the question. Remember, I provided questions for you to give you really an inkling of what the general idea is, what the general topic is. But let's talk about how we really target the question, okay? So first, the first thing you want to do is you want to define the core of the question. What are you actually asking? So I have an example on the next slide, and I will kind of discuss how we narrow it down, but just in general, defining the core of the question. So if the question is related to video game play and improvement in Parkinson's symptoms, what's the core of that question? Is it in general just video game play in Parkinson's, or is there something more? Do you want to go a little bit more narrow, a little bit more focused into that question? What is the timeline of the question? Meaning, or what is the timeline in this case in a sense of the entire study, but related to the question? So how long do you want to do the study for? Is there going to be like an introductory period that's a certain period of time, and then you're going to move on to a data collection period that's another segment of time? How much time is it actually going to take? Geography, again, location, location, location. Very important. Depending upon the topic that you're given or the question that you come up with, location can be a way of really differentiating your study from others. Specifics like the population. Who are you studying? Are you studying people with Parkinson's? Are you studying cigarette smokers? Are you studying students ages 18 to 25? Who is it that you're after? What is your population? And of course, the who, the what, the when, the where, which really gives you those four kind of questions, give you the specific information that you need in order to develop a very, very focused and concise question. So let's look at how this works in an example. The example here is, what is the difference in aerobic capacity between females ages 60 to 75 years old with either heart disease or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease during a submaximal exercise bout on a bicycle, on a stationary bike? So let's look and see how we want to maybe narrow this question down, okay? And I also want to I want to point out to you that the flow chart above is being used to actually end up with the question that you see at the bottom. Okay, so in other words, let's be clear. I may have not been clear at the beginning of that statement. The question at the bottom is the research question. How did we arrive at it? We created a flow chart, which then we were able to kind of move through the flow chart and get much more specific as we go. So first we start with a condition. In this case, we say heart disease and pulmonary disorder. You could just do one condition. You could just do heart disease. You could just do pulmonary disorder. You could do neurological disease. You could do restless leg syndrome. You can do so many different things. But from that point, you need to make very, very specific judgment calls on who you're going to look at so that your research question is targeted. So let's take a look at how we do that. We have four categories. The first is age. The second is gender. The third is method. The fourth is type of exercise. So in this case, this researcher knew that they wanted to look at exercise. Okay? Obviously, there are many, many different kinds of exercise. In this case, we only use two to simplify the example. But let's first take a look at the leftmost part of the slide, ages. Do we want to look at young or do we want to look at old? Now, obviously, those are very general age categories, and you can stratify to within 10 years, but good luck, obviously, finding enough subjects for that. Or you could look, ages 18 to 30, so 12 years. Or you could look at 18 to 35 and add another 5 years to it. Or you could look at older people. You could look at ages 50 plus or ages 65 plus, which gives you, again, a lot of flexibility in terms of who you're looking at, but also it's an ease of recruitment, because if you narrow your ages too much, you're going to have a difficult time recruiting people of that exact age. Let me kind of also just step back for a second. Being in a university environment, chances are people are ages 18 to, let's say 30, okay? Obviously, there's students that are older than 30. I'm not saying there aren't, but let's say 18 to 30, you're probably going to have a decent recruitment because most of the students are within that age group. If you made it, something like 18 to 22, it might be a little bit more difficult because now you're only dealing with like a 4 to 5 year difference, and therefore it's going to be harder to recruit from that specific pool, unless you had a pool of people that you were starting with at first and then just kind of pulling from that pool. That doesn't often happen, though. Recruitment is a very difficult part of research. We'll kind of get to that later. The second one is gender, and we're going with male and female at this point. Now, there are definitely other categories of gender in today's day and age. And listen, if you wanted that to be your specific population, great. But again, you have to wrestle with the issue of feasibility and also approachability, but feasibility. Can I get this done? Even if I'm using, if I'm using transgender populations, are there enough individuals who fall into that category who could be part of my study? So for this simplification, we're going to be using male and female. The method, again, there are many, many different methods, but we're only going to take just, two, and we're going to say It's between free living and laboratory studies. And for exercise, we're going to say the difference between resistance and aerobic. So now let's take a look at our question and break it down. What is the difference in aerobic capacity? So we've chosen aerobic over resistance. And I want to point out that you could look at both resistance and aerobic capacity, or resistance exercise and aerobic exercise. But realize that when you do that, you lengthen the study time. It takes a lot longer to do both of those than it does to do one. And especially if the resistance exercise is going to be a 12-week training program, you're going to need to do 12 weeks of training, probably wash out the outcomes over another 12 weeks, and then have them do another 12 weeks of aerobic exercise to determine which one of those interventions has the greatest effect. Because otherwise, you can't do 3 weeks of 3 weeks of resistance and 2 weeks of aerobic and 3 weeks of resistance, or you can't do Monday resistance and Tuesday aerobic and Thursday resistance and Friday aerobic. It doesn't work out that way. If you really want to determine what the effect of the training intervention is, you've got to have the same amount of time for both types of training. So in this case, we chose aerobic capacity between females. So we chose females at this point, right? So that's our gender, females. Ages 60 to 75 years. So we chose the older segment of the population with either heart disease or COPD. Now that's a difficult one. The question itself is not extremely targeted because it has two conditions. So what that means is you're going to have to really double your recruitment. And you're going to have to find people with either COPD or heart disease. Chances are you're going to have the same number of people with both conditions. And those people are going to have to be obviously female, and you're going to have to train them aerobically. So, or at least look at their aerobic capacity. That's a tough one. If you wanted to knock it down to just one condition, that's great. And it makes it a little bit easier, obviously, for recruitment, but also for you to actually finish the study. And then the last part of this is during submaximal exercise on a stationary bike. So we answer the method question, which is we're doing a laboratory study. Stationary bicycles can be set at certain resistance. We can have them pedal at a particular revolutions per minute. We can measure their wattage very, very easily. We can look at the power. We can look at a lot of different variables. But stationary bikes are used in a lab. So we're not going to be using a free living environment. And chances are we're not using a free living environment because it is a bicycle test, and because I'd rather not these 60 to 75-year-old people be biking outside while I'm collecting data. So it makes it a lot easier. So again, we took this flow chart and we targeted from condition to ages, gender, method, and exercise, and we came up with a very, very targeted question. Okay, now, in 1998, Clark et al. Published a study that basically that introduced an acronym related to research methods, and the acronym stands for CAFE. And so let's go through these just briefly to talk about why these things are important when you're trying to figure out how your question relates to the study as a whole. First of all, complexity. It's the first thing we see. And if we go back, I'm just going to kind of go back to the slide before, you can see that there is a decent amount of complexity to this question, right? It's aerobic capacity, it's females, two different conditions, and what is that capacity during a submax bike test? So how complex is this study? The most complex part about the study is the fact that you have people with heart conditions or pulmonary conditions doing a bike test. Right there, you've got a little bit of risk, a little bit of complexity, maybe a little bit of difficulty recruiting, and carrying out the study as a whole. You have females ages 60 to 75. I don't know. It might be difficult to actually recruit that subject population, or it may not. It really depends on what situation you're in. If you're in an academic center, it may be difficult. If you're in a hospital, it may not be. So again, it really depends. But overall, the complexity of that study I would say on a scale of 1 to 10 is somewhere around a 6 to a 7. It's not impossible, but it's not the easiest study in the world. It has a little bit of complexity to it. But it is very important to understand the complexity and then say to yourself, okay, this is a 6 out of 10 complexity. Am I going to be able to do this? It's very, very important that you ask yourself that question. The second point is access. Extremely important when it relates to feasibility. If you don't have access to either the equipment, we've talked about this before, the laboratory that you're studying, that you're doing your study in, the population that you're studying, the instrumentation, the whatever it is, if you don't have access, you cannot finish the study. This will be kind of a deal breaker. So you must have access to the things that you need to get this study done. Now, that doesn't mean that's not necessarily only access to facility and resources, but it's access to much more. It's much more about the population. It's about do you have the time to actually do this? Do you have the right instruments to measure information? And so then the third bullet point relates to facilities and resources. So again, moving back to our question, what kind of facilities and resources would you need? Well, you're testing people ages 60 to 75. My advice would be to do this in a hospital setting. My advice would also be to do this study under medical supervision. So right then and there, you've got to be in a hospital and you've got to have some kind of medical personnel available for every single test that you do. And chances are, if you're going to have people with heart disease and COPD, you probably need 25 in each group, which means you're going to need 50 people, which means it's at least 50 hours for medical personnel to supervise that. So those are the kinds of resources that we're talking about. Do you have access to the instrumentation, access to the population you're studying, but do you also have the facilities and resources at hand in order to conduct the study properly? And the fourth is expertise. Do you, as the researcher, have the expertise to carry this out? Now, this is kind of a catch-22. Think about it this way. You're a grad student. You're asked to do a research study, a prospective research study where you have to collect data. You don't really have expertise in research. So what do? Well, you possibly go to a mentor or you go to a professor who maybe has expertise in either research methods or even in the type of research that you want to do, and you lean on them. That's how we learn, right? We learn from the people who have gone before us. So you may not have the expertise, but if you can channel the expertise through somebody else, then you have a much better chance at the study being feasible and also at the ability for you to finish the study, publish the study, and get something out of it that you then take on to, let's say, your PhD program or to your later in your academic career or whatever. You take that piece of information, you take that education that you got through your research study, and then you build on that. And then 5 years down the road, now you have the expertise, and now somebody's coming to you as a mentor, and then that's how the cycle repeats. So very important that the person doing the research, or at least the person with whom they're channeling that research, does have the expertise to carry it out. Now, it is important that you caution against not having symmetry of potential outcomes. And this is an article from Gill and Johnson in 1997, which basically said, if you're going to do research, you need to do the kind of research that whatever finding you come up with is going to be useful. It has value. So for instance, if I'm doing this research back here and I'm saying all I want to do is I want to do a descriptive research study on the aerobic capacities of females with heart disease and COPD during submaximal exercise on a stationary bike, well, the findings are either going to be, they're not going to be anything. It's not going to be yes, it's not going to be no, it's just going to be descriptive. Here's the aerobic capacity of females ages this with COPD. Here's the aerobic capacity with females ages this with heart disease. It's not going to say really, is it going to say one's better than the other? That's great. They're two completely different diseases, so I'm not really going to be able to compare the two. But if I had an intervention where I said, after a 10-week aerobic intervention, or a 12-week aerobic training intervention, what is the aerobic capacity between da-da-da-da-da, then I would have something to go on, and I could say, wow, look at that. That aerobic intervention did nothing for the individuals with COPD, but was extremely important for the people with heart disease, or vice versa. Or I could say it was great for both. And then I could look at the mechanism of each disease and determine why is it that the aerobic capacity had an effect on one but not an effect on the other. That's great. We're talking about no symmetry of potential outcomes. So you want to basically say, look, there's value in not finding a positive outcome, and there's value in also in finding a positive outcome. So there's value in the negative and there's value in the positive. Doesn't matter. So when you look at your question has to be phrased in such a way that regardless of what findings you get, there will be value to those findings. And if you have questions about this later on, please send me an email, because that's a little bit convoluted, but tried to simplify it as much as possible. Okay, let's take a look at objectives, and I'm going to give you some very, very clear examples. One of them, one of the studies that I did, and then another way of using a template to kind of determine what your objectives might be. So objectives are an essential, they're a guide that will help answer the question that you pose, right? So here's my question. My question is about the aerobic capacity of individuals who are this age and female, who have COPD, and what is their aerobic capacity during a submaximal bike test. I'm going to then set objectives of these are the things that I want to measure, I want to conduct, I want to explain, I want whatever. These are the targeted things that I'm looking to do. It's a list of ways that you're going to attempt to achieve your aims. Okay? So one thing is you set the scene and identify tasks to complete. In a sense, think of a movie set. You set the scene, and then you have your actors and actresses come out and play their roles. That's basically it. So your tasks are the actors and actresses' roles, and the scene is the movie set. So you set the scene. What this basically means is that when the person reads your aims and objectives, they know exactly what you're doing. Exactly what you're doing step by step. And you have to have a measurable set of targets. These are called, this acronym is called SMART, and it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Let's go through them. First of all, the targets need to be specific, and that's kind of going back 2 slides, exactly what we did. We specified our target population, we specified our target disease, we specified the ages, we specified the gender, we did all of that. So we were very specific about who we were measuring and how we were measuring, right? We set a submaximal bike test. They need to be measurable. So whether that's qualitative, using a survey, or it's quantitative, using a device or an instrument, doesn't matter. They need to be measurable. If these things are not measurable, then you don't really have, there's nothing you're showing in your study. Your findings don't really mean anything. They need to be achievable. Speaking about feasibility again, I'm going to hammer this in. It is so important that when you do any kind of research, you make sure that it's feasible. I don't care if it's the most incredible idea you've ever come up with in your life. If you can't achieve it, then it's not valuable to anybody. Realistic, along the same lines, if you can achieve it, is it something that's realistic? When we talk about realistic, we're talking about, again, the population. Is it a population that you could recruit from? Is it instrumentation that you have access to? Is it facilities and resources that are at hand? Do you have, if need be, do you have expertise that you could kind of pull in and lean on if needed? So is it realistic to do, and is it time bound? Is it a year study? Is it a 12-week study? Is it a 10-week study? We're not just going to say, listen, we're going to study, people ages 60 to 75, and we're just going to study them for, until they get tired, or we're going to study them until we reach 100 people. We really have to have it time bound, and that also speaks to the ethics of the study, right? The subject needs to know what they're getting into, so you can't say, listen, we're going to be doing this study for the next 35 years, so we'll call on you when we're ready. It's more, this is a 12-week study. you're consenting to being in a 12-week study. At any point in time, you can withdraw from the study, or we can withdraw you from the study. But at least you know at 12 weeks it's going to end. Or it's a crossover design. It's a 12-week study, and you're going to be in this group, and then for 12 weeks you're not going to do anything, and then in 12 weeks you're going to be in the next group. So in other words, it's a 36 weeks total time frame, but it's 12-week interventions. So you need to be very specific about how the time is going to work. So it needs to be time bound. Those are very important targets to make sure that you check off when you're going through setting up your research project. And what are the things that are being attempted? Well, we're trying to develop something new, meaning we're trying to develop a new idea, a new approach, whether it be, it can be in the methods, or obviously, as we talked about, there are many different ways of doing new kind of research, and I put like air quotes in there. New research, location, we can use location, we can use changes in population, context, whatever, but we're trying to develop some new information. Trying to create an environment where the research can be conducted, right? So an environment that's professional, an environment that's safe, an environment that's effective, so that you get the findings that you're looking for. To conduct the research in a way that is aligned with your target goals and your aims, your objectives. To perform the research. Now, it's performing the research, but also in some cases, when you're dealing with sports science, it's also the subject is actually performing a task. So in those cases, perform would be for both the researcher and the subject. Or the participant, and to disseminate the research, to take your findings, publish them, put them out there into the scientific literature, and add to what's there. So let's take a look at a real-world example and look at what aims really, really look like. This is a study that we did using Parkinson's patients, and we were primarily looking at what is the socialization aspect of people who have been in a 10-week exercise program for people with Parkinson's. So how do they socialize after that? What kind of physical benefits do they gain, if any? And I will tell you that before I left LIU, we were in our 5th year of this program. It's a fantastic program in conjunction with an advocacy group in Brooklyn called the Brooklyn Parkinson's Group. And the training was great. It was resistance training, mat work, aerobic training, and it was all conducted by a aerobics instructor who was certified in geriatrics and also in exercise for people with Parkinson's and older individuals. And it was just fantastic. It was great. People got a lot out of it. What's interesting is that physically we didn't see a lot of change, but we did see a lot of change socially. So let's take a look at this. This is from a letter of intent for a grant. I don't remember how much the grant was, but it probably would have paid for about 5 years of the program. So the first aim was to conduct an ongoing series of 10-week group exercise classes for people with Parkinson's, and we talk about what those classes included and how it's a collaboration and how long it's been going on. Aim 2 is to examine the effectiveness of the program with an experimental group and a control group for people with Parkinson's who live in the same area, and results of the changes over a 7-month period will then be compared between groups to investigate the effectiveness. So we would look at 10-week training interventions over the course of 7 months. And our program ran every single semester, including the summer. And so we had a lot of data since we had been running this program since 2008. So this particular aim is something we had been doing for 5 years. We just didn't collect data in a study situation. It was just kind of a program. So when we were setting up these aims, these were feasible. These were achievable. We had basically been doing this for that long. Aim 3, to determine or document the effects of long-term participation in the program using a single group pre-post design. So looking at people before they started the program and looking at them after. every 10 weeks, pre and post, and also across the 7-month time period, pre and post. But you can see these aims in this very, very specific kind of way of narrowing down the research really meets the criteria of everything we talked about beforehand. Complexity and access, facilities and resources, having the expertise. We've been doing the study since 2008. Are these specific goals? Are they specific populations? Yes. Is it measurable? Absolutely. Again, we've been testing them pre and post for that long. Is it achievable? Realistic? Yes. Time bound? Yes. I mean, we're very specific about our time. So, taking a look at these aims, I'm not going to read through the rest, but taking a look at these aims gives you a very good idea of how you break down and how you dissect your question to be very, very specific so that you know exactly what you are targeting. Okay, if we look at another example, this is kind of almost like a Mad Libs for research scientists, but what do you want to understand? What is the objective of your proposal or of your research study? What is the central hypothesis? And do you have any preliminary data? Like, in other words, we did that program since 2008, so we had a lot of pre-data or preliminary data. And we used that data to then push forward this whole idea that we could do this. Even though we didn't get the grant at the time, we had a lot of preliminary data that was very, very positive, showing that this program's fantastic. Even if not for physical benefit, it's fantastic for their psyche and also the way they feel amongst other people with PD and people without PD in society. Very, very important stuff. And the rationale for the proposed research is once it's known how we do this, we can then pursue studies that have very specific aims. So we need a rationale. We need a reason to do what it is that we're looking to do. So aim one, do you have an aim? Dissect your question. Put together an aim. Our working hypothesis for this aim is that we predict that this is going to happen. Aim 2, aim 3, the same thing. But in aim 2, we will test this hypothesis by doing X and Y. So meaning this kind of test or that kind of instrument or this kind of survey or whatever, but how are we actually measuring the data we're collecting, and how do we determine whether or not our prediction, our hypothesis, is either null, meaning we are rejecting what we thought would happen, or rejecting the null hypothesis, saying, hey, you know what? We actually proved what we thought we were going to. Aim 3, insert the text again. In these studies, we will examine the prediction that whatever the prediction is. Again, you don't have to have 3 aims. You could have 1 aim. But it's a way to kind of narrow down everything in your research studies so that everything's nice and concise, very specific, easy to read, and easy to understand. Okay, last couple of things. Putting pen to paper, and you do this over and over and over again with major edits and many, many revisions, but here's what you need. And this, I think, is going to help you tremendously when you write your own research, and especially for this particular research project. I want a clear statement of your aims and objectives. What are your aims and objectives related to your particular topic and your question? What's the statement of novelty, of relevance, and significance? In other words, how is this research novel? Is it in a different location? Is it using different equipment? Is it different methodology, a different population? How is it relevant? Is it relevant? If you look at the research that we did with Parkinson's disease, Parkinson's disease is becoming a fairly popular or common neurological disorder, and it is absolutely debilitating. People can live quasi-normal lives, but it's very, very difficult. The relevance of our program was that for people in the demographic of Brooklyn, they could come to a group exercise program 3 times a week and have a social kind of construct they'd never had before, and go to social groups and go on trips with this group that they exercise with. And not only that, maybe gain a little bit in strength and a little bit in flexibility and possibly a little bit in aerobic capacity. The relevance is that it really improves their quality of life. So what's the relevance of your question? What's the relevance of your study? And again, the significance. And not only relevance but significance. In other words, what impact is this going to have? Are we going to be able to, and here's an example, would we be able to take the 10-week training programs that we're doing at LIU and stamp them out in New Jersey and stamp them out in California and put them into places in Seattle and put them into places in Montana? I don't know. We never got that far. But that was the significance, that a program like this could have a major impact across the country for people with Parkinson's. So that was really the significance, as opposed to, that the physical benefits were so great that the symptoms of Parkinson's just kind of disappeared. That we did not find that. Also, a lit review. So try to find out what's been done before. We kind of talked about this, previously. Look at the gaps in the literature and start to understand your topic from a real in-depth standpoint. Understand your topic, understand what questions might be asked of your topic, who's done what, who's done what kind of research, where have they missed things, what does the lit review tell you? Start thinking about the methods. What kind of methods would you like to use? And we're going to talk about methods in this class, but think about what's out there. The analysis, think about the analysis, although this is not a very it's not a heavy statistics course. We'll talk a little bit about analysis and what might be appropriate, but you don't necessarily need that right now. But just kind of keep it in the back of your head. Time frame. What's the time frame? How long do you want to do this research for? What are the expected outcomes? And that literally means, what's your hypothesis? What is your prediction? What are the specific requirements to actually carry this out? What would you need? Would you need a lab for 3 weeks? Would you need a lab for 3 days? What would you need? What kind of resources, facilities, what kind of expertise? What do you really need to get it done? And what are the ethics? Are you poking people with a needle 3 times a day? Are you just asking them to do a bite test? Are you just taking a survey? So what are the ethics? It's very important. We'll talk a little bit about ethics later on, but it's important that studies are ethical. And for, you took the that test online for researchers, and it talks all about the way that ethics have become have evolved into research, right? In the 1920s and 30s, there was really no ethics in research, and obviously in 1939 and throughout the early 40s with the Holocaust, that was the the reason why ethics have become so important in research. And that relates to consent forms, informed consent. It relates to withdrawal from a research study without anybody being penalized. It really is important. So what are the ethics of the study? And again, kind of keep that in the back of your head so that you at least are thinking about that, okay? And some pitfalls. Watch out for the research problem is a problem. What that means is, if the research problem that you have is actually a problem to conduct the research, move on to something else. And I'm being honest with you. If the question I gave you is something I can't find a damn thing on this. I've looked at this. I've gone to the library. I've gone to books. I've gone to journals. There's nothing out there on this topic. I will give you another topic. So if it's a problem to conduct the research, then please let me know, and we'll move on to something else. But know that that's a pitfall. Don't keep going down the rabbit hole. If after a while you've done some sufficient research when I say sufficient research, sufficient investigation on the information that's out there on your topic, and you can't find anything, then maybe there isn't anything out there. The approach is unapproachable. Okay, so it's not achievable. You actually can't do this. You don't have the resources, you don't have the facilities, you don't have the expertise, you don't have the time, you just don't have the required criteria to get it done. So try not to fall into that trap. And the researcher is not the right person for the job. So again, for this particular project, you're each going to become experts in your own little way. But when you're conducting your own research, really make sure that either you're extremely kind of well-versed in the topic, or that at least you can channel someone or lean on someone that is. Because if the researcher is not the right person for the job, it's definitely going to show in the writing of the paper. It's absolutely going to show in the way the research is conducted. So just be careful of that as well. Okay, that's my take on research methods, aims, and objectives for today. If you have any questions, please send me an email. Have a great week. And again, I will put up online in an announcement the due date for the research component, which is the question and bibliography. And if you have any kind of concerns, please check the syllabus because it's pretty specific as far as what is due. So with that, have a great week. I hear it's going to get warmer into the 50s, which actually is insane to me that it was, minus, it was below zero and then it's going to be 50. So good luck with that. Wear a coat and have a great week. And I'll be speaking to you.